And so I'm going to focus mostly tonight on what brought us to LifeVantage, which really was our journey with type 1 diabetes, and really type 1 diabetes, because I do see that as something that is a big question mark. And I'll kind of tell why, because I'm sure some of you know people, maybe some of you on this call are type 1 diabetic, maybe you have family members who are type 1. Or you know someone and just wonder, how can I reach out? And I feel like I'm absolutely hitting a wall. And I get that. I get the wall. As a mother of 2 type 1 diabetic sons, there is a necessary wall that type 1 diabetics and type 1 diabetic families and caregivers have, because there's such a misunderstanding and misconception about what type 1 diabetes is. So 7.5 years ago, my life was overextended, and I was executive director of a nonprofit in downtown Kalamazoo, and that really took a lot of me. And at the same time, my husband and I decided we were going to open a franchise restaurant. And a little bit of Liz dipping into my background. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and I have done a little bit of everything. And that's probably my problem. I reach my hands, and I have too many irons and too many fires. At the time, I had 4 sons, and we were bringing into our family a 5th son who had been through extreme neglect and trauma and abuse. And that alone was consuming. Opening a franchise restaurant was very consuming. And being the executive director of a nonprofit was consuming. And on top of that, my youngest son, he's an identical twin, so he's equally as young as his identical brother. But one of my sons, Gabe, and I'll just refer to him as Gabe, he was 10 years old at the time. He's 18 now. And he was absolutely non-functional. All of a sudden, something had hit him in 5th grade, and he wasn't able to go to school. He wasn't able to be himself. He was lethargic. He had a whole slew of symptoms that kept him from being able to function day to day, from headaches to heavy limbs to nausea to just extreme fatigue. And I had been pretty versed, you guys. I've been pretty versed in holistic ways and natural avenues. And so I tried everything from elimination diets to supplements to functional health specialists, while at the same time dipping into Western medicine and going through diagnostics. He had a spinal tap. He had a hospitalization. He had, what was the one? We saw so many specialists, infectious disease. We saw every possible specialist, and no one had an answer for Gabe. And I was weary. I was exhausted. I really love to talk to people who are skeptical, because I was the one who I just didn't want to hear of something else, some other answer that someone had, because I had tried it all. We had eliminated sugar and gluten and corn. And, I had tried every possible supplement, and his pediatrician had him on trial meds that now I look back and I wish we hadn't done, but, I was a desperate mom. And a friend of mine who I had worked with in ministry, I knew her very well. I've done, I work with people with inner healing and extreme trauma. And so I know people well. I do inner healing sessions with people, and I knew her as well as someone could know her. And she reached out to me, and she, in our area, in the greater Kalamazoo area, she owns an adult foster care home. And I had been in the ministry capacity. I had been to this adult foster care home. She normally keeps about 8 patients there who are end of life, hospice, or needing round the clock care. And she said, Angie, I think I have something that can help Gabe. And if it wouldn't have been her, you guys, and that's why I say, like when you form relationships with people and you have trust, it means so much, because if it wouldn't have been her, I would have slammed the door, slammed on the phone. I maybe would have been mean to the person. I was not open, but I trusted her. And she said a few things that got my attention. She said, Angie, our overseeing physician at Gull Arbor, and that's the name of her adult foster care home. She said the overseeing physician recommended that I put every single patient that I have on this natural product. She said, so I researched it for like 6 months, and I knew her. Like I knew when she said she was going to research 6 months, she probably researched around the clock 8 months. And she said, I was willing to give it a try. And she said, I've seen such radical things radical. I don't know. Can I say non-compliant things on this call? Okay. She said, Angie, I've had people come out of hospice. I've had people come out of dementia. I have people at type 2 diabetics going off medication. She's like, I tell you, you got to just come listen. She said, I actually pay now on my dime to put every patient on this product because I can staff less people for their care, which I knew to be true because, when people are end of life, they're combative. One day I saw her with a black eye just from caring for someone who was in the death process. And she said, it's worth it for me to actually pay for it if I get the family's permission. She said, so I'm doing an informative and I'm presenting to the families and just come listen. So I went and I listened.
With the YouTube Music app, you can blend up to 30 artists into one big custom radio station, which means...
It sounded amazing, of course. You've heard the science. I heard the science, and I thought, if this is true, this is amazing. What have I got to lose? We're upside down with Gabe's medical bills. And at the time, with our son, Deshaun, who is joining our family, we did not have medical rights to him. So I was not able to get him medical care. But I could give him this because it was considered food. So I said, you know what? For $50, I'll put myself on it. I'll put Gabe on it. I'll put Deshaun on it. And I'll stick to what happened with Gabe, but I can tell you that Deshaun had very, very dramatic results very quickly. He was 15. Gabe was 10. And Gabe came back to life. Like Gabe missed all of 5th grade. And we started Protandim after his what would have been his 4th last day of school. And he just came like back to life. It was very bizarre. He was able to go to school the next day. And I thought, he's not going to make it through a day of school. He hadn't made it through a day of school. And he made it through a day of school. And I hadn't really connected the dots. But I thought, this is kind of weird. Gabe's feeling better. And then he went the next day to school. And then he went the next day to school. And Gabe was able to go to school the last 3 days of 5th grade. Just from activation. It just literally flipped a switch in him. I know that that's a cliche word that we all say, but it flipped a switch in him. And it stopped whatever process that I didn't know what it was at the time, but it stopped the process that was trying to manifest in his body. And he was functional. He was great. I thought, okay, maybe I don't need to know what the answer was. Maybe I don't need a diagnosis. My son is better. And we just kind of walked that out. I kept him activated for several months. And I hadn't really jumped into the understanding of what it was and why, so that I was deeply valuing it. But I was noticing the changes in Deshaun. I was noticing the changes in myself months in. And I thought to myself, after probably 8 or 9 months, Gabe doesn't need this anymore. He's better. So I took him off of it. And I kept myself on it because my results were very radical. And I thought, I don't want to be without it, but Gabe's okay. And after a couple months of Gabe being off of it, we hit Thanksgiving and he came down with bronchitis at the same time that my husband came down with bronchitis. And my husband got well and Gabe didn't. And Gabe snowballed, and he also had very bad medical care. His pediatrician had retired and we were trying a new doctor, and we had some pretty gross misdiagnoses and negligent care. And unfortunately, Gabe spiraled deeply into a life-threatening DKA, which is diabetic ketoacidosis. Of course, I didn't know what that was at the time. He lost 22 pounds in 2 weeks and was dying. And fortunately, through a turn of events, we had some life-saving measures where we were able to get him to the emergency room in time. And I remember the ER nurse said to me that, he's, of course, type 1 diabetic. We didn't know that. And she said, when did these symptoms come on? And I said, it's interesting. he was sick a year ago, and it was very slow and it was long, and we never got a diagnosis, but it looked just like this, but less severe. And she said to me, and I said, but then we gave him something natural and it stopped it. And there's a reason why I'm giving you guys this part of the story. I think this is really important. But I said, I gave him something natural and it totally stopped it. And I said, but then I took him off of it. And it came back like with a vengeance. It came back like horrifyingly. And the doctor didn't know what I was talking about, the natural, what natural thing. But she said, oh, type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. And sometimes they take like a year or so to manifest fully for diagnoses. She said, whatever you gave him probably stopped that process. Like now I look back at that and I'm like, my gosh. Said, whatever you gave him probably stopped that process. And then when you took him off of it, his body started attacking itself again. And so by that time, I knew a little more of what we had. I had dug in a little bit because of my results and Deshaun's results and what people had seen, a year before with Gabe. People wanted to know about it. I was learning about it. I knew enough at that point that when they gave my son an insulin IV to save his life, what we had at the time, the largest stack we had was Vitality Stat. And I put Gabe on it immediately. And I knew I never want him to be diabetic without this advantage. And so I just wanted to share with you about the advantage. And I've got it. I'm so sorry. I put on my glasses to see what time it is. Okay. Because type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Type 1 diabetes is not type 2 diabetes. My friend Chanel had patients in her adult foster care home that basically through activation were able to reverse type 1. They went off insulin if they were on it. They went off their type 2 diabetes or type 2 meds. Type 1 isn't like that. My kids basically have pancreatic failure. Their pancreas has small functions, but not life sustaining. And so even if they were to get a pancreas transplant, they have beta cells that would attack a new pancreas. And so they can't survive without insulin. And I need their bodies to absorb insulin to keep them alive. And that's a foundational aspect of the autoimmune disease type 1 diabetes. So sometimes when we're looking at LifeVantage and the results that we see people have, we think, oh my gosh, if someone starts taking it, they're not going to have this disease anymore. And I can tell you in 7.5 years, I have not had that experience with type 1 diabetes. But at the same time, I would never, ever, ever have my kids be type 1 diabetic without it. And I should say real quick that a year after Gabe's diagnosis, his identical twin had a diagnosis of type 1 as well. And so my identical twins are type 1. We manage both, and they're amazing. They're 18 now, and their numbers are incredible, and we keep them in probably what's the word that I'm looking for? Abnormal. We keep them in abnormally good health. Maybe that's I'm blinking at what I wanted to say. In abnormally good health. And with that, I always tell people, I'm not in type 1 diabetics and type 1 diabetic caregivers need to hear from you when you present LifeVantage. They need to hear that you don't think it's going to cure them. We have people all the time come to us and tell us that if they just ate different, or if they tried cinnamon, or, there's all these wacky things out there, and we're exhausted. And type 1 diabetes is exhausting. There's no dose for insulin. A lot of people don't realize this. When you're type 1, you don't know how much insulin that you're supposed to take every day. It changes constantly. And they never get to eat without dosing insulin to counter the food, the carbs, the fat, the protein. And we're always guessing. You never know how much they're going to eat. You don't know how their body's going to adapt to it. And their insulin needs change based on hormones, based on heat, based on stress, based on weather, there's so many things that influence, and it's exhausting. So when you talk to someone who's type 1, they're exhausted, and they immediately think that you don't understand what they're dealing with day in and day out and day in and day out. Because while we're guessing as far as how much insulin they need to survive, and they can't go off insulin. So you're not going to give them Protandim NRF2 and they're going to never need an insulin again. My kids would die without insulin. And if we guess the wrong amount or we make a mistake and give them too much, insulin also can kill you. So it's this constant balancing game, and it's stressful and it's exhausting. And I don't say that to like pull on the sympathy cards. It's just, I worked cross-line with a lot of people who are reaching out to their type 1 diabetic friends. And I feel like there has to be a sensitivity there to recognize I'm not talking to a type 2 diabetic, and I'm not talking to someone whose disease has any kind of pattern of going into remission. And so with that said, I want you to know why it's so important for type 1 diabetics to be activated. And one, I want you to remember the story of Gabe. And I'll probably cry, but I don't apologize for crying because it's a human necessary emotion. Gabe's process stopped with activation, you guys. Like the disease was trying to manifest and it totally stopped. What if I had never taken him off of it? You know, like, and Gabe and I talk about that. And he said to me just the other day, he's like the most kind-hearted, beautiful human. He said to me, he said, Mom, you need every single person who's when type 1s are diagnosed, they're in this period, sometimes it can last up to a year. It's called the honeymoon period, where the pancreas hasn't totally failed yet. And he's like, everyone needs to know in the honeymoon period, they need to get activated. Everyone needs to get activated. So there's the urgency, because you know what? I mean, it's scary because you guys know you can't keep people on these products. They stop, they start, they give it a try to, you know, and then they take a little time off. But it's like, what would Gabe's life have been like if I hadn't taken him off after a few months? And just thought he's okay now. You know, I don't blame myself. That's not shame talking. I know that I didn't know what I didn't know. And he holds no animosity towards me, but it ignites a passion for us. I have an advantage that a lot of people don't have. I saw the disease manifest and I saw it totally stopped. And I will never, ever get that picture out of my mind. And it does light my fire when I talk to other people. It ignites me to take risks and to share with people. And if it did that in the early manifestation, what is it doing now for Gabe, his twin brothers Kai? What is it doing now for Gabe and Kai? If it had the power to stop it in front of my eyes, now as they're years in, I'm so encouraged to think that same power is working for them, even with this diagnosis. So that's my first point, is I've seen what I've seen and I can't unsee it. It stopped it. Secondly, one thing that's very important with type 1 diabetes is, as I mentioned, I need their bodies to absorb insulin. Some people have a really hard time absorbing insulin. From day one, and I had them on Vitality Stack from day one. Their endocrinologist has said to me, wow, these boys have an incredible ability to absorb insulin. I wonder why that is. And really, we see that with activation. It just increases the body's ability to take that insulin in. Insulin is what's keeping them alive, and I need them to receive it. And so anything that's going to help their body receiving it, I am all in. And so every single one of our activators have that effect that increases insulin absorption, even more so now the collagen. And so they're not on the collagen yet, simply because I have a huge family and we're on all the products. So I can't afford it yet. I need to hit like, you know, EC2, and then everyone will be on everything. But
school is back, and Dick's Sporting Goods has what you need to win your year. We've got everything from cleats to sambas, dunks, and more. Plus, the hottest styles from Nike, Jordan, and Adidas. Find your first date fits in-store or online at Dicks.com.
right now we're on everything before the collagen. And so if people ask, what are your diabetic boys on? They're on everything. They're on the Vitality Stack plus NAD plus Axio. And then intermittently they drink prebiotic and daily wellness as well. And that brings me to my second point for type 1 diabetes. when type 1 diabetics, being an autoimmune disease, they should be more apt to get sick. They should be catching the flu, COVID, pneumonia. And my boys did before they had type 1, before they were activated. I passed on a low white blood cell count to my children. And so we were a revolving door before activation at the doctor's office. We were always getting sick, from sinus infections to pneumonias to any common virus coming around. And we would get it harder than most people would get it because of that low white blood cell count. And we just don't get sick. My type 1 diabetics don't get sick. And people will ask me, you know, when COVID was happening, people would say, aren't you so nervous about the boys? I'm like, I'm not. They just don't get sick. And if they even get a sniffle, we double up and then it just goes away. And the reason that's so important is because when type 1 diabetics get COVID, when they get a sinus infection, when they get the flu, if they get pneumonia, they end up in diabetic ketoacidosis. They end up in a life-threatening situation. Blood sugars are out of control. You can't control it. You know, insulin and the different things that we do to try to get blood sugar higher or lower, they just are negated through illness. And it's been 7 years, you guys, and my kids just don't get sick. So that is reason enough for activation. Any one of these reasons on their own would be hands down convincing of why I would invest in this for my type 1s. The next reason, the next benefit for type 1 diabetics is that NRF2 activation is an antifibrotic. And so when it balances our survival genes, we know it balances over 500 survival genes, NRF2 alone. And some of those are antioxidants, some of those are anti-inflammatory, but some of those are what we call antifibrotic, which our body, in that fight or flight response that we tend to have when we're fighting something, our bodies tend to overproduce scar tissue, which creates things like heart disease. Scar tissue is good, we need it, but the overproduction can be very dangerous. And why that's important for us is that whether type 1 diabetics are injecting, like we call it MDI, multiple daily injections, like with shots or like an insulin pen, or whether they have a pump. My boys have a pump. So they have a pump site that we can move their pump site. It's kind of like a port that keeps insulin flowing into their body round the clock. And if they develop scar tissue on any of those sites, they will never be able to use that site again, ever. You run out of space on your body where you can put in a site or where you can inject. And so scar tissue and an overproduction of scar tissue is very, very dangerous for us because we cannot run out of places for their body to receive insulin. And between their activation internally, and then we also use topical, we use the True Science, which is NRF2 activated, so in itself is essentially antifibrotic. So for wherever their sites are, or if you're not familiar with what site would mean, like wherever they're injecting insulin, we use that True Science cream on them and it just heals. We've had no scar tissue whatsoever on any of their sites. And from day one, their endocrinologist has always been feeling for that. And what's really, really remarkable is, you know, with teenage sons, they have only a couple places right now that they are willing to have their sites. When you are type 1 diabetic, your endocrinologist will really encourage you to move it. There's a few different places on your body that are like squishy, squishy enough to like really be a good place for a site that have a little bit more body fat. And they want you to move these around so you don't develop scar tissue. And my sons won't. They have a couple places that they will have their sites and they're not going to budge. And so statistically, they should have scar tissue there. And they don't. We just keep using those same places and they're rocking it. And it's just, I truly believe that it's due to them being activated, that they haven't overdeveloped scar tissue as a response of the constant injections. So that also keeps them absorbing insulin at the rate that we need them to absorb. So with that said, my visual of age shift, the immunity, the antifibrotic, the insulin absorption, and there was one more. Oh, just that activation is proven to protect every organ. So already, like, I don't, I'm going to sound like a little bit callous here, but their pancreas is out of the picture now. Like, we can't, their pancreas is not very good. But type 1 diabetes is the leading cause of kidney disease. People lose their eyesight. People lose their limbs. People have heart failure. And so every other organ is stressed because the essential organ of the pancreas just is not working. And so if I can invest in something that protects every other organ of their body, I'm looking at this like, I want my boys to have the best possible health. I want them to defy every possible odd with type 1 diabetes. They have it. Like, I get that they have it. I'm not looking for it to be cured. I just want to defy every odd. I want them to be, you know, the 20-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds that people look at and say, oh my gosh, we've never seen this before with type 1 diabetes. And so that's what I'm seeing so far. And it excites me because I see results in myself being a 51-year-old woman, 7.5 years activated, and kind of seeing how that longevity of building the accumulation of activation within my own system. And I'm very excited because they started earlier. I didn't start till my early 40s, but they started when they were 10 and 11. And so it's exciting for me to see what it looks like for them 10 years into diabetes, but activated, because their diabetes anniversary is their activation anniversary. And so we're going to be able to see these long-term effects that maybe haven't been seen before. So that's kind of in a nutshell why I really am passionate about type 1's understanding about activation and what I say this a lot, a non-negotiable tool in their tool belt it should be, because type 1's have that. We have several non-negotiable tools in our diabetic tool belt. The way we eat, their pump, their CGM, and activation. And so we don't always have to say, hey, maybe you won't have this ailment if you're activated. What we can say to people is, wow, maybe with this ailment, you can defy every possible odd given to you because of activation.
Oh, Angie, I mean, the chat, everyone appreciates this so much. And this testimony just speaks volumes about the power of what we have our hands on, and why we have this, we need to share this. And, you know, I know our team appreciates you taking the time out of your busy schedule to share this with us, because you can see that, I mean, I resonate with a lot of your story from my own personal history with my family and our kids and our health. And, you know, the mama bear comes out in us to be able to, when we find something, especially as powerful, this has had on your children's health, to share that. And I'm just so grateful that your friend shared this with you, and it was who it was, because that skepticism is a huge factor why people don't even take a look or not open to the information. And I feel the same way about a friend, Katrina, who introduced activation to myself after dealing with chronic Lyme disease for years. So what a blessing and a gift this has been for your family. And I know that I learned a lot tonight, and I know that this is definitely going to be something that is going to benefit it's going to have a ripple effect across our team and the people that they come in contact with type 1 diabetes as well. I see